ability to have the multiple tracks, the database nature, I think all that stuff is fine, but the mixing is a pain in the neck. I don't like it, and I've shared that with Apple. I've shared it with very specific people at Apple. I've shared it very specifically with people that are still unable to sit down, and I've shared it with Apple. So, for people to say, first, Final Cut isn't working perfectly, this is the point. It can't possibly work perfectly for everybody when it first ships. It may work well for you if you're in a tapeless environment, tapeless of speed, power, ease of use are important to you, and you're not laying off the tape, and you're not ingesting the tape. I'll come back to that in a second. It's huge. It's just that you absolutely owe it yourself to look at it. If everything you do is tape, you can absolutely guess today, ingest from any firewire attached device. You can ingest the frame accurately. What you cannot do is you cannot do batch capture. You have to do one shot at a time. I'm not saying it's perfect, I'm just telling you what is. If you are someone who has to lay back to tape, that's going to require some help from third-party vendors like HAA and Blackmagic Design. HAA and Blackmagic Design both have workarounds to allow ingest from tape formats that are not firewire connected. They both announced, and we need to talk to both of them about what's going on. Color correction is significantly improved inside here, but the ability to export to color, no. One of the big limitations of export is that you can only export a single clip. By that I mean it takes your entire project, coalesces it into a single piece of video, and exports it. This is stupid. You need to be able to export clips. You need to be able to export XML files. Well, 2 days, a week and a day before the launch, I was meeting with, I'm not permitted to say who, key technical people at Apple. And I said, guys, the lack of XML export is not the brightest decision. This is why Apple loves me so much. I said, just who was the brain-dead idiot that came up with that idea? And they both pointed to each other. I said, so is there no hope? And they said, no, you have to understand. What we've done is we've put the first version out there, but we've left massive hooks in. So that people, for instance, Automatic Up just announced the ability to take and grab those hooks from a staff software development point of view, and grab those hooks and be able to take the audio and the clips out of Final Cut into another application like Pro Tools, which I might add is owned by Apple. And that's the first third-party piece of software that's supported. I find that wildly awesome. So, for me, the first question is it cool? Does it have new features? The answer is clearly yes. 64-bit support, blindingly fast, everything is background, optimized for tapeless. So there's some very, and the fact that it has a gray front end like iMovie bothers me not at all. Because it was inexcusable for Apple to have no upgrade path to iMovie for what, 8 years? You couldn't upgrade anything for any reason. You start with iMovie, you want to grow somewhere, you've got to learn Final Cut Express. I'm sorry, that's just a really, really weird corner you've got to turn. So it makes sense to have support for iMovie. It makes no sense, none, to have an inability to move Final Cut 7 projects. A translator has got to be done. It's just inconceivable that we would ship this without a translator. So I sent all these comments back to Apple. Apple sent me an email. I said, Apple, are you listening? And they wrote back and they said, of course we're listening. Of course we're listening. That said, as we've talked about with you several times now, this app, Final Cut Pro 10, is about the future of editing. So that means that if you're missing something like multicam, for those of you twittering, catch this next phrase. For those of you missing something like multicam, it is not unreasonable to believe that we would add that along the way. If you're missing something older, like EDLs or tape output, well, we probably aren't going to focus on that. But there's definitely an opportunity for third parties to bring that kind of functionality to the table. That last phrase, functionality as you know, many of the things that we counted on for developers to create for Final Cut 7, we are also counting on them for Final Cut Pro 10. Think of Sony XDCam. We had to get the drivers for XDCam from Sony before we could edit inside Final Cut. We had to get the drivers for Red from Red before we could edit Red footage inside Final Cut. We needed to get drivers from a variety of manufacturers. P2 actually required drivers when it was before we moved it over to Final Cut. So the need to get drivers for people to create the products, that generate those products. I mean, look at the format wars we went through for the last 2 years. Every week a new camera was announced, and every week they needed to provide new drivers and new connectivity for us in Final Cut before we could edit it. There was time where for 6 months we couldn't edit the JVC camera because JVC didn't support the drivers on Final Cut. Back to the email. The ability to run Final Cut Pro 7 and Final Cut Pro 10 side by side is important, as is the point about updates. Parenthetic. One thing that's brand new about Final Cut Pro 10 is that it's distributed through the Apple App Store. Apple has never distributed through the App Store an application of this complexity and size before. Go back to the email. I don't think we said anything about the number of updates we're doing per year. That's Apple talking. I could have sworn I heard an engineer say they were hoping to do more than one a year. That's Larry talking. I'm back to Apple. And this person personally doesn't have any roadmap info, and if she did, or he did, have roadmap info, they would be shot before dawn. But it's incredibly important to know that the Mac App Store allows us to release new features, quote, well, when they're ready. It won't be the traditional couple of years between feature updates. That's the huge point. And this is absolutely true. By being able to distribute electronically via the App Store, Apple doesn't have to go through the massive distribution and prep for distribution that's required whenever you do something which is released on retail channels through DVD or CD. The most important point, this person continued, the most important point of all, though, is to keep the big picture in mind. We know this is a major change. We know that some of the long-time users are going to be shocked. And I know you know the rest. Yes. Apple told me that they viewed this product, Final Cut when it was first released, was Apple's view of editing for the next 10 years. This is Apple's view of editing for the next 10 years. Some of us, for instance myself, most of my podcasts are done on multicam. I can't use this for my podcasts. Most of us, or some of us that are outputting to tape, can't use this for outputting to HDCam plus our tape. All right, we've got to give it time. We've got to wait for the third party to communicate and to get up to speed. But there's some cool stuff here. So, before I tackle your questions, let me just end with this one point. This is not a life or death decision. Your children's college education does not necessarily hang in the balance of whether you upgrade to Final Cut 10 now, or in 3 months, or 5 months. You can use Final Cut Pro 7 today. Let's not lose sight of the bigger picture. The bigger picture is our job is to tell stories. Our clients don't even know we're using computers yet. Apple is staking out its version of territory that says this is where the future is going. If we agree with that and can wait 3 or 4 months, then I think we're going to see some significant improvements from the third-party community and from Apple. If we have to absolutely, positively go to something other than Final Cut Pro 7, then there are other applications like Premiere, like Apple, that we can go to. We are not forced today to make a decision. I've been running Final Cut 7 and Final Cut 10 on my system back at the office for the last 2 months. Over the last 2 months, I've put together 11 hours of training specifically designed to help all of us make the transition into Final Cut Pro 10. There are some things I'm not going to use Final Cut 10 for. There are some multi-cam podcasts. There's some things I'm going to start to use Final Cut 10 for, and I'm not putting it on my production system, and I'm not meeting deadlines with it until I get more comfortable with it, until I learn it, until I feel like it's a part of how I can tell my stories. But that decision is my decision. I'm not being forced by Apple. I'm not being forced by clients. They just want to know I can live with the goods. That is what I think we can ultimately do with Final Cut 10. Just let it takes some time.